Hello, this is Dr. Chandra Shekhar Sharma. I'm Associate Professor of English at CSIT World. And today in this video lecture, we are going to talk about Ode to Nightingale, which is a famous poem of John Keats. Keats is known as a famous romantic poet. In this video lecture, we will be talking very briefly about John Keats. Then we will proceed to a very brief understanding about Ode. And at length, we will discuss the poem Ode to Nightingale, Stanza-wise. So let me start my presentation with John Keats. Keats was a famous romantic poet of second generation. Born on 31st of October 1795, Keats wrote some famous odes which are his signature works. I think almost all the universities in the world include Keats' poem in their program on literature, because his odes are signature works which reflect the romantic spirit. His poems represent the romantic spirit because they project the emotional dimensions, mysticism, influence of nature, the strong embodiment of vivid natural elements, the philosophy, the individualism, and the involvement of mystic elements. Let us come to the poem Ode to Nightingale. What do you mean by ode basically? Ode is a type of elaborative poem structured in a lyrical form, and the basic purpose behind writing an ode is to phrase an event or an object. It's a very intellectual poem. The term ode is derived from a Greek word, and the basic idea behind writing odes in Greek was to narrate the or valorize the brighter side of something. It's a classical poem, and fundamentally odes were written to be sung, to be chanted. Let us come to Ode to Nightingale now. While I'll be dealing with this poem stanza-wise, I would like the listeners to please keep the text open before them. You may see that I have put the stanza out here on the screen, but this is just meant for a hint, because the slide looks very clumsy because of so many words here. But there are some people who may not have the text, and for those people, for the convenience of those people, I have kept it here. Now, the first stanza goes like this: that my heart aches and a drowsy numbness pain, my senses as though of hemlock I had drunk, or emptied some dull opiate to drains. 1 minute passed and lithe words had sung. 'Tis not through envy or thy happy lot, but being too happy in thine happiness, that thou light-winged dryad of the trees, in some melodious plot of beechen green and shadows numberless, singest of summer in full-throated ease. I'll not read all the stanzas. This was the first, so I have put before you. This is the introductory stanza. And in this stanza, the poet describes his senses or conditions. In the beginning 3 or 4 lines, you may not understand what the poet is talking about. He says, my heart aches and a drowsy numbness pain. So why it is happening? This secret is revealed in the next 4th or 5th line, where he says that on listening to the nightingale's melodious voice, he feels as if his heart is aching, it is paining. His senses have gone numb. He feels as if he has drunk hemlock or have emptied opiate inside him. He feels as if he has drunk the water of Lethe. Now, what is Lethe? Lethe is a mythical river, and it is said that if anybody would have drunk the water of that river, he would have forgotten everything of the past. So on listening to the voice of Nightingale, the poet feels that he has forgotten everything in the past, whether pleasure or the pain. The poet is carried away by the happiness of the nightingale. Now, in the sixth line, it is not through envy of thy happy lot. Now, why this is happening? It is not happening because the poet is envy of the poet is envy of the uh, happiness of the nightingale, but it is happening because the poet he has fallen in line with the happiness of the nightingale. That means on listening to the thought, to the voice of the nightingale, the poet has lost everything. He calls nightingale in this stanza as light-winged dryad of the trees. Now, what do you mean by dryad? Dryad is a mythical queen of greenery. The poet is emotionally and psychologically influenced by the nightingale's voice. He says that, "Oh Nightingale, you are able to sing of summer in full-throated ease." And do remember, when we talk about summer, when the poet is talking about summer, the summer in the uh, cold countries is very pleasant. Let's now go to the second stanza. It is before you. And in the second stanza, the poet projects his love for nature and the ideal elements that are present in the nature. This stanza is full of symbolic notations, which altogether are pleasure giving. For example, "Oh, for draught of vintage." Now, vintage is a wine that hath been cooled a long age in the deep dwelled earth. The older is the wine, the sweeter is the taste, they say. So, what the poet is saying is that, "Oh, for the draught of vintage." He says that on listening to you, I feel that your voice is like the old vintage wine, which has been kept inside the earth for a long period of time, tasting of flora and the country green. And that wine is tasting of what? It is tasting of flora, fauna, dances, provincial song, sunburnt mirth. That means the poet is not talking about the wine in literal senses, but in symbolic senses. He says, "Full of true, the blushful hippocrene, with bedded bubbles winking at the brim, and purple stained mouth, that I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into forest." He says that after drinking such wine or such pleasure giving drinks, he wants to leave the world with no consideration. He wants to leave the world behind. But where? He wants to go with Nightingale. Having been influenced, the poet wishes to leave this world and go with the nightingale in the dark forest. That is there in the last line. "And with thee," thee here is nightingale, "and with thee fade away into the forest deep." In the third stanza, the poet says, uh, or talks about the desire to escape this world, fade far away. The ideas with which the second stanza ends are the same ideas with the third stanza starts. The poet wants to fade away, dissolve, means get lost, and quite forget this world. He wants to move beyond this world with Nightingale. The weariness, why? The reason is here. The weariness, the fever, and the fret. The poet says that this world is full of nuances and troubles and fever and fret and a lot of pains and miseries. And that is why he is fed up on this. That is why, because of all these nuisances, because of all these miseries and pains, he is not able to find peace or melody in this world. And that is why he says he wants to move away from here. He says, he complains about this world, that where men sit and hear each other groan. In this world, people talk about each other's groan, each other's gossips are there. Where, and in the sixth line, he is talking about, sorry, fifth line, he is talking about, where palsy shakes a few sad last gray hairs, where the youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies. He is talking about the death and the diseases. He is talking about the ailments which grow and make people sad and result in the death. And that is why he is fed up. Where but to think is to be full of sorrow and leaden-eyed despairs. He says, he narrates the pains and mortality of human work. This stanza is a stanza of narration about pain and miseries. Where but to think is to be full of sorrow and leaden-eyed despairs, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes. Do remember the lines that truth is beauty, beauty is truth. Here, in these lines, he says that beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes. That means even the beauty is mortal. Beauty cannot keep its lustrous eyes means beauty is also mortal. One day or the other, the beauty fades away in this world. And this is because of the miseries and pains. Or new love pine at them beyond tomorrow. Either the beauty dies at one or the another point, or new love or new sensuous feelings comes up, thereby subduing the older ones. That means the poet is crying over the sad part or the darker part of this world. In the fourth stanza, he talks about escapism very clearly. What he says here is, he wants to move away from the world. Away, away, for I will fly to thee. He says that he wants to go away from this world with the nightingale. But how? The answer is, how will he would like to go? He continues to talk about his leaving this world by following Nightingale, not charioted by Bacchus and his pards, not on a chariot, not on a mythical chariot, but how? But on the wings of poetry. Whose poetry? On the wings of the poetry of Nightingale. Wings of the poetry means wings of the song of Nightingale. Though the dull brain perplexes and retards, though his dull brain is perplexing, is retarding, is tired, but he would like to go away. Already with thee, tender is the night. He wants to go away with the bird, with Nightingale. And happily the queen moon on her throne, clustered around by all her starry face. But here there is no light. He wants to go away, and what he sees is that he sees Queen Moon is on the throne. That means it is night, and the moon is there in the sky, surrounded by the stars. And cool breeze is blowing through wondrous glooms and windy, mossy ways. He wants to move away from. He is describing the scenario of night or the darkness of the forest in this fourth stanza. And in this stanza, he is projecting what he would be seeing. Here in stanza number 5, there is a beautiful description of nature at full bloom. But there is a question. Since it is night, the poet is not able to see anything. It is dark. But even it is dark, the poet is enjoying the company of Nightingale. The poet says, I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hang up the bough. He says that he is not able to see what flowers are there. He says that he is not able to see what flowers are hanging from the branches. But he is able to sense through their fragrances, through their sweet fragrances. Because where with the seasonable month endows, because they are all the seasonable flowers. The poet says he can sense the smell of grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild, and the trees bearing the fruits in the wild trees which are bearing the fruit. How? Through the smell. In this stanza, there are names of different flowers also. The poet says that he can smell white hawthorn, the pastoral eglantine, the violets which are covered up in the leaves, and mid-May's eldest child, which is musk rose. The poet calls musk rose as May's eldest child. Why? Because the musk rose blooms in plenty in mid-May, in the colder countries. This is a poem about cold countries. So these are the flowers he senses. Due to darkness, he cannot see these flowers, but he is able to recognize them correctly through their smell. White hawthorn and the pastoral eglantine, fast fading violets covered up in the leaves, and mid-May's eldest child, the coming musk rose full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies on the summer wings. And he can also sense the murmurous haunt of the flies on the summer eves. Let's go to the stanza 6 now. Darkling I listen, and for many a time I have been fallen, half in love with easeful death. Now in this stanza, the poet is glamorizing death. Why? Because he feels that death is a means to escape this world. But he says he's half in love with that. What he says is that darkling I listen. He listens for many a time. He has listened to nature many a time. And I have been half in love with easeful death. He says that with easeful death, he is half in love. Not full in love, half in love. With easeful death. Now here, the emphasis should be on easeful, not on death. Easeful here means the pleasure or the silent death that can come to a human being. Why? The answer for this this question about death will be in the next line, the next stanza. What next line? Sorry. Called him soft names in many amused rhyme to take into air my quiet death. The poet says that he would love to take his last quiet breath into air. Why? The poet wants to die while listening to the song and being away from the frets and miseries of the human world. He says, no more than ever seems it rich to die, to seize upon the midnight with no pain. When the poet is in company with Nightingale, there is no pain. The poet says that there is no pain with him, no misery with him. He is full of joys, mirth. And he says that if death comes in such mirthful time, it is really good for him. While thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad in such an ecstasy. He says that while the nightingale is singing, while you are singing with full-throated ease, and the environment is very pleasing, so it will be a pleasure to breathe the last breath. Still wouldest thou sing, and I have ears in vain, to thy high requiem become a song. In stanza 7, the Keats is praising Nightingale. He says, thou wast not born for death. Now, this is very important. The poet is justifying the immortality of a bird. He says that you were never born for death, my dear Nightingale. No hungry generation treed thee down. No hungry generation can bring you down, can kill you. The voice, why? This is so because the voice that the poet is hearing in this passing night, it was heard in ancient days by emperors, by clowns, by everyone. He says that maybe the bird you were born not to die, and you are immortal not because of your physical characteristics. You are immortal because of your sweet melody. You are immortal because of the sweet voice, the melody, because of happiness. So he says, perhaps this song has been heard from times immemorial to the present day, and that is why you are immortal. He further says that the sad heart of Ruth, when she was sick for home, when she was feeling homesickness, she also heard your sweet voice. She stood in tears amid the alien corn. She was standing in a field, and she would have heard you. And because of your voice, the last two lines I'm reading, charmed magic casements opening on the foam of perilous seas in fairy lands forlorn. Because of your sweet voice, the charmed magic windows opened and they allowed the foam to get inside into the fairy lands. In this stanza, Keats is hailing the immortality of Nightingale because of its sweet voice. The melody is so important for Keats that he says that it will last long and it will never die. Let us move to stanza number 8. This is the concluding stanza. In this stanza, now stanza 7 ends with a word forlorn. And this particular word forlorn brings the poet back to the real world. The poet says, forlorn, the very word is like a bell. This very word is like a bell, alarm bell for me. It is bringing me back to the real back, to call me back from thee to myself. This word is bringing me from you to the real world, from the world of the fancy to the real world. Adieu, adieu means goodbye. Adieu, the fancy cannot cheat so well. He said reality cannot be cheated by fancy. He talks about Nightingale and says, as she is famed to do deceiving else. You are famous for deceiving. Adieu, adieu. He says, goodbye. Thy plaintive anthem fades. Your sad song is fading away. That means the nightingale is moving away in the valley. It is moving far and far from the poet. And he could hear the voice, the melody of the nightingale fading past the near meadows, over the still stream. The melody is coming far from the meadows, from the forest, and it is moving further, and it is now coming from the still stream. Then it is coming from hillside, and then it is lost. It is buried deep. It is lost. That means the poet is not receiving the melodious voice of the nightingale. In the next valley glades was, now the poet is back into his senses and puts question to himself. In last two lines, was it a vision or a waking dream? He questioned, was it a vision to listen to Nightingale? Was it a dream? Fled is that music. That music is not now. It has gone. It is lost in the meadows. Do I wake or sleep? waking up or I am sleeping. Now let us come to the structural analysis of the poem. Ode to Nightingale is an irregular ode. It has 8 stanzas sprung over, each stanza is sprung for 10 lines and 10 pentameter lines, basically we should say. The rhyming scheme is uniform. If you know how to assess the rhyming scheme, you can assess for each stanza and you can find what is the rhyming scheme of this ode. In this ode, Keats is evaluating the human world in terms of miseries, pains, and pains, and the worries that surround human life. And because of these worries, the poet has a strong yearn to escape from this world. The poet wants to leave this world. You must be knowing that Keats was very sad because he lost one of his brother because of tuberculosis. So this is a poem of escapism, and in examination also we get a question that justify that Ode to Nightingale is a poem of escapism. With this, we come to the end of the critical analysis of this poem titled Ode to Nightingale. I hope that this video would have helped you in understanding and appreciating this poem. Thank you very much. Namaskar.